history. And I think that this project is really, really a case study in the ways that it actually shows that you can't move beyond that. This project is an example of a multicultural project. It's not only a project, it's a multicultural, how do you say, ideology, I would even say, because it's who we are. It's all about multiculturalism. It's not just a buzzword. Mm-hmm. We are all about we, as human beings, all about multiculturalism, actually.
I would like to come back to a few concepts that you mentioned during your conference at the University of Ottawa. Could you please develop the idea of narrative pedagogy?
Well, it's about using, for example, I'm talking about from the historian point of view, it's about using slave narrative to create and develop knowledge. It's about seeing how they fit not only in the, how can I put it? Yes, using it to create knowledge and using it to transmit knowledge, to create a circular pattern of knowledge. I tell you the story, you will tell it, not simply as a narrative that people are remembering and examples and small bits and bobs, but as a history that is actually part of a bigger history. So it's about teaching, it's about education actually, finding ways to include people in teaching, in education, sorry. The figure of the black preacher was instrumental in empowering black communities. Let us look at the work of Josiah Henson through his narrative. In her work about slave narrative, Yolanda Pierce suggested that telling one story over and over again was one of the many results of the revelation experienced by former slaves or slaves. Renewing one's mind, being born anew, was so powerful an experience that it needed to be heard over and over again to inspire others. In the case of Josiah Henson, the revelation occurred when he heard an anti-slavery white settler preach. This is what he said. When I arrived at the place of meeting, the services were so far advanced that the speaker was just beginning his discourse from the text. Hebrew 2:9, quote, "He, by the grace of God, should taste of death for every man." This was the very first text of the Bible to which I had ever listened. Knowing it to be such, I had never forgotten it. The divine character of Jesus Christ, his life and teachings, his sacrifice of himself for others, his death and resurrection were all alluded to, and some of the points were dwelt upon with great power, great at least to me, who heard of these things for the first time in my life.
Okay. And what about kinship in the place of Bible in the slaves' narratives?
Oh well, I just think you can't do without. I mean, religion, it was such an important part of the whole history of the slave trade or the whole history of slavery. I mean, the transatlantic slave trade, for example, and abolition as well. So that kinship, religious kinship, is central, in my sense, to that history. So it's not just about people's religion, but it's about ways of finding ways of establishing other forms of connections, because you've got connections through funding, through money, through whatever. But this is central because all those people were related through religion. Slaves were, once they were converted, slaves were provided with a membership card that proved that they belonged to a religious group that had ramifications all over the world. Those groups were also provided with education. Church service was marked by songs and prayers, as well as direct participation of members during the sermon. Slaves were empowered during the services. That means, actually, you are part of a group of people who believe in God, and being a member of a recognized religious group gave Hanson a sense of worth and created a momentum he needed to take action. His first step was to learn more about Jesus Christ and preaching, and he was preaching at the same time, even though he could not write and he could not read. Hanson's conversion introduced him to a sphere that had been denied to him so far. Through the Christian revelation, he was not just a slave, but a being who had been created by God and he was loved by Jesus Christ. And you find out in his narrative, he says, he wrote, I was in a state of great excitement at the thought that such a being as Jesus Christ had been described should have died for me among the rest, a poor, despised, abused slave who was thought by his fellow creatures fit for nothing but unrequited toil and ignorance for mental and bodily degradation. Whether I'm thinking about slave owners as well, they were all believers. So I know it might seem contradictory, but actually religion was still important to all of them. So in a way, it was turned into something nice to work for abolition later, but it was still there. So in my sense, they were mistreating slaves, but in the case of British Caribbean, slave owners weren't so harsh on slaves who were baptized. It's not my sense, actually. Historically, that's what happened. So religion was still there to sort of work as a guidance or as a watchdog, so to speak.
I'd like to ask you then, do you think the Promised Land project is a historical event only, or something that you can still see today?
Yes, it's both for me, because I always see it from the historical point of view. But as I said a bit earlier, it's about connecting people. This is human experience we're talking about. So you can use it. You can look at as a historical, as something accurate that happened in the past. But you can also look at it as another way, another example of ways of connecting human beings. So yes, it's still valid, totally valid today.
Okay. I do not think I have more questions. Maybe you'd like to add something to the questions that we asked you today, something that maybe we haven't really gone into depth.
Yes, I think that one of the things, I know it might not be central, but I think it would be interesting to look at the gender roles in the Promised Land.
Okay.
To look at the fact that women were totally involved. Okay, you might think that they was just fighters as the rest of them, but there is a specificity of women fighters. I do think, there are ways in which they use their creativity and.
Do you have any specific example?
Yes, one of the main examples is Marianne Chad Carey, but I don't want to focus on her because there are many, many more women actually who are not well known, I'm pretty sure, and we'll find out about them as we go along. But I have to insist on gender specificity and importance in that particular project.
Okay, well,
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.